streaming. Let's make sure it's where it's supposed to be, yada, yada, yada. That'd be a good way to start. Okay, cool. Great. Okay. What's that? Do I have your test on me? I may not. I don't think I've got your test on me. I'm pretty sure I grabbed it. You've already taken it, right? Oh, you haven't? Then it should be in the front office. You can take it whenever you have time. You can go and take it now if you want to. Yeah. Yeah, just go to the front office. She's got it, and there's the testing center is right next to the office. She'll just walk you over there. Yep. And when you're done, you can come back because it won't take you any longer than any regular test. Okay. Water. Right, so, yeah, if you sent your papers in via email, your grade should already be on Blackboard. I mean, regardless of how you gave me your papers. If you gave me your papers, it should be on Blackboard. If it's not, I didn't get your paper. That goes for you online folks too. Those of you that took your test, that had to like make up your test, I meant to grade those this weekend, but I was incapacitated with a migraine for most of the weekend, so I'm getting that done like today and tomorrow. So I'll get those on Blackboard as soon as I can. I think that's it. Any questions from anybody? Okay, so we've got a full week this week. We've got we've got 2 days next week. Well, one class for us next week, because it's Thanksgiving already. Jesus. And then the week after is a full week. And for us Monday, Wednesday folks, we've got the following Monday, December 5th, which will be a study day, or, study guide review day sort of thing. So yeah, we are getting right up to the end. And honestly, for my Tuesday, Thursday class, I'm going to try and slow things down with them as much as I can to try to even things out between us and them. So let's see how far we can get, because I don't want to make a new test for them compared to the test I'm going to give y'all. And try to be as efficient as possible. Also, if we want to watch a video, let's take it to the hallway. Okay, great. All right. So, this is where we ended it last time, with basically Jefferson doing the opposite of his stated goals of reducing the powers of the federal government. Which, you could argue went all the way back to the Louisiana Purchase, but his hands were kind of tied with that one, and nobody was really complaining because it was a major boon for the burgeoning United States to suddenly purchase all this land for next to nothing. I mean, yeah, $50 million was a lot back then, more than it is today. But for most of what is now the continental United States, minus the Southwest, Yeah, that was like nothing. Um, However, with the Embargo Act, which was meant to protect shipping from the English, um, it actually ended up hurting shipping. And as we've seen back before the Revolution, which Jefferson should have known about, when you pass acts to stop trade, people improvise. And by improvise, I mean they start smuggling. And the American response to smuggling was the exact same as the British response to smuggling back before the Revolution, which was a force act to forcibly stop the smuggling, which again further expanded federal power and made people feel like, A, the government was against them, but also that the president, who literally ran on a platform of the government, the American government is becoming, well, specifically the Federalists, are becoming like the new British, so therefore we need an administration that will decrease the power of the federal government, is making the federal government stronger and also like restricting trade. Yeah, didn't go so well for him. So again, we have this fantastic image. I do love how you do have all these old weird images and posters and whatnot, and they like censor themselves. I don't know, it's strange. This cursor will grab me. Anyway. Again, I changed the format of the slides without going in and changing everything manually, so sorry about that. U.S. population grows and migrates. Again, if you've got your hands on the books, that's literally the subtitle in the book. So, again, one of the major results of the end of the American Revolution, or the War for Independence, whatever you want to call it, for war or for independence, because the revolution had already happened. Anyway, was the proclamation line set up by the British no longer applied because, well, we're not following the British rules. So the land between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River were now open for business, or at least open for settling, besides, just ignoring the natives that were there. So by 1820, a quarter of non-Native Americans were now west of the Appalachians, which was a pretty significant amount considering how many lived in cities anyway. Speaking of cities, most still lived in these rural areas, because, well, that was the majority of the land, and most people were farmers, so unlike today where most people work in typically service jobs, which require you to be near some kind of city center, even if it's barely a city in today's standards. Back then it would be considered like a crazy massive metropolis. Back then most people were farmers, so you lived out in the countryside and you ran your farm. But cities did quickly begin to grow in the early 1800s. This was, again, well, no, I shouldn't say that. The Industrial Revolution was happening in Britain. By 1810, had probably spread to Germany and was slowly starting to make its way over here. We'll get to the Industrial Revolution maybe next chapter. I know it. I mean, it certainly hits the north before it hits the south, which is kind of the point. Anyway, New York and Philadelphia hit 100,000 residents by 1810. A large minority of these immigrants were, a large minority of this number were immigrants, in particular the Irish, because, I mean, they were coming over by boat, and New York and Philadelphia were seaport towns. And also, there wasn't any kind of like immigration office to help them settle further inland. It was just like, hey, you're here, good luck. And most of the earlier Irish settlers had just settled somewhere in the city and had formed their own communities. So the new ones that showed up were like, oh, hey, look, an Irish community that's already here, let's settle there. And it just kind of became a cycle. And you'd have regions within each city that would have like certain ethnicities. There were cities on the frontier, though. New Orleans, which had existed, since French occupation. Cincinnati started growing. I kind of want to show the Cincinnati video. It happened in the 80s, so it's not really related to what's going on, but I literally saw this stupid Cincinnati video last night, and it was ridiculous. Anyway, Cincinnati was one of the early cities as well. And since it was technically on the frontier, like along the Mississippi, or I guess Ohio River, it encouraged further migration west because, hey, these are large population centers that need workers, and so, hey, places to go. Obviously, the more people that headed west created greater conflict, not just with the Native Americans that had been living there. Make sure that's still on. Oh, actually, I've not checked the mic. That would have been bad. Okay, cool. Mic's working. Oop, I went back. Okay. Just because the French had sold off the land didn't mean that the French settlers suddenly disappeared into the ether. There were still French settlers that were there and stayed behind. There was plenty of Spanish planters, especially further south, that didn't appreciate the encroaching Americans. So there was a great deal of conflict as Americans pushed further west, which will result in a couple of wars, many wars with the natives, aka genocides. What mail am I getting? Yes. And at least one war with Mexico. When's the Spanish-American War? That's later. So as far as overland shipping, they finally started getting to work on roads, and I'll show you what the roads look like in a little bit. But honestly, up until this point, roads have been awful literally since the fall of Rome. I'm not being hyperbolic. And honestly, even still, I'd say the roads in Rome were better than the roads in the 1800s. Because the roads in Rome were like stone. The roads in the 1800s were gravel, which still had a degree of technology to them as far as like drainage and whatnot, but we live in South Carolina. We know what gravel roads are like. They wash out eventually. The stone roads in Rome are still around, and it's been a good 2,000 years. I don't think anything of modern architecture is going to be around in 2,000 years. So, to give an example of how bad overland travel was, before they finished the Lancaster Turnpike, it cost as much to ship, let's say, a ton of wheat. I think I've got it actually here. I guess not. It costs as much to ship a ton of wheat 62 miles over land to Philadelphia. I think it was from, what was 62 miles from Philadelphia? I don't know. It doesn't matter. It costs as much to ship wheat 62 miles by land as it did from Philadelphia to London by boat. And in case you guys aren't real good with maps, from London to Philadelphia is a lot further than 62 miles. The Atlantic Ocean, maybe not as big as the Pacific, but the Atlantic is a large ocean. And it's just because overland travel was awful. So we're going to talk about Albert Gallatin again a bit later. This was the guy we mentioned last chapter, Jefferson's Secretary of the Treasury, who was supposed to help him reduce government spending, but he's actually most famous for, at least in my mind, to help fund these internal improvements. And internal improvements in government speak mean infrastructure. So like roads, canals, it's technically boring stuff, but especially for a new country that doesn't have any roads or canals, extremely important for the economy. And in the next chapter, we're going to mention a canal that transformed the economy substantially. So we'll get to that to a greater degree next chapter. It actually was, when I was doing this for my Tuesday, Thursday class, for some reason I was exactly a chapter ahead and was looking at that part in the chapter, but the notes weren't gelling exactly. I was like, why isn't it talking about this part, but we're talking about canals? It was real weird. Anyway, we had the National Road. This is also known as the Cumberland Road. From Maryland through Pennsylvania and into West Virginia. Eventually made its way into Ohio and Illinois. Again, well, I'll say again, the term turnpike, which isn't something we really use here in the Southeast, we don't have a lot of toll roads. Really, the most toll roads I've experienced in this state are further west, and you can go around those real easy. Up north, they're a lot more common because they're always having to redo the roads because of ice. But the only turnpike I really can remember is in Jersey, so you don't have to ever touch any city in Jersey. You can go through the entire state and never, ever go into a city. But a turnpike originally is a medieval term because, you know, we're not very creative. And it would be a road, which again, medieval roads were basically dirt clearings. So if it rained, you were stuck. It'll be like a gatehouse, and it would literally be like two dudes, two like infantrymen with pikes, and they'd have them laid across the path, and you couldn't pass because your horses aren't going to like charge through pikes. Those are anti-horse weapons. And you pay your toll, and then they'd lift the pikes up, much like the little like arms in front of a like railroad crossing today. That's how they were laid in front of the road. And that's where we get turnpikes. I mean, you either pay the toll or you turn around and go back. Anyway, a little bit of entomology for you. Robert Fulton. He's most famous for creating the first successful steamboat, the Clermont, but it should be noted that the steam engine he was using was created by Oliver Evans because steam engines took forever to perfect. And Oliver Evans was the first one to actually have a efficient steam engine. Steam engines came before Oliver Evans, but they were real awful. They did the thing, but they weren't very good at it. And Robert Fulton didn't just like slap a steam engine on a boat and get it to work. He worked with Robert Livingston in Paris, and because Robert Livingston had a ton of money and saw that this could actually work, so he actually paid for this thing. Again, not the first person to think, hey, what if we slap a steam engine on a boat? But there were a lot of variables to balance, and Robert Fulton was the first one to get it right. So again, just didn't come out of nowhere, but Fulton was the first one to get it correct. Much like with the phone, we think, oh yeah, Alexander Graham Bell. Like, yeah, he certainly wasn't the only one with that idea. In fact, he and another gentleman filed patents on the same day for a telephone, but he filed his earlier that morning, so he's the one that's credited with it. Telephones, obviously, much later. That's just the first thing that came to mind. So steamboats were very important because prior, if you wanted to ship stuff on a river, you basically put it on a barge and let the current take care of it, which is like a large portion of the Huckleberry Finn book. It's just like we're on a barge and we're just floating down this river. The most you could do is just use a stick to keep yourself from running into stuff. Because the only way you can really fight against the current is with sails. And if you've ever been on a river, you know that trees like to grow next to rivers. And if you've ever seen a sailboat, sailboats and trees don't mix too well. So you don't really want to sail up a river. However, with a steamboat, you can actually ship up river because it doesn't have big old sails that get caught in the branches and can just steam on up the river. And also it can go downriver faster than the current, so it actually speeds things up either way. And also once they had them on seaworthy vessels, they could get across the ocean faster. The issue with steam engines, though, is they needed to be balanced upright. If they tipped one way or the other, the boiler would overflow, and that would either cause it to They'd either cause it to just like go out entirely, the boiler would go cold, or it would cause it to explode. And we're going to look at some boiler explosions a little bit later, and those are bad. If you've never seen a boiler explode, yeah, it's a good thing we don't really use boilers too much anymore. They're extremely dangerous. So here's the growth in cities between 1820 and 1860. As you can see, majority in the Northeast, but a lot of them cropping up along the Midwest. Charleston exists. That's about it. Montgomery popped up. They found an iron ore deposit there in Montgomery. Montgomery, Alabama's claim to fame is they had some iron ore there, so they're a big iron smelting city. But yeah, besides the fact that, where's my mouse? Hello? Screw it, I'll let people have to deal with it. Besides the big cities over here getting substantially larger, and really to this day, having driven from here to Rhode Island, or Providence, Rhode Island, multiple times, really once you get past Richmond, Virginia, it's just all one big city, and it's a pain in the ass. You can see like all the smaller cities cropping up along the Midwest. And that becomes especially true once railroads become a thing, but we're not quite there yet. Because with railroads, you don't have to rely on the rivers anymore. And actually, all these, and really everything through the middle of New York State there is due in large part to the Erie Canal, which is the big important canal I kept alluding to. We'll get to that next chapter. Oh, here's the roads. So, these are what proper gravel roads look like. Obviously, you flatten out the terrain. They dig trenches on either side for the water to go to. Ditches today, but they are specifically trenches within the gravel roads. Then they lay down broken rock, which are larger than the actual gravel, and then they layer it down with gravel and smooth it out, so that when it rains, the water goes through the gravel and hits the broken rock, and then the water flows along the rocks into the ditches on either side. Because it's supposed to be, if you do it right, the rocks in the middle are higher than the rocks on the side, so it'll naturally flow to either side. So that's what a technologically advanced gravel road looks like. I think today it's just dirt with gravel thrown on top of it. And there's the National Road. And these were a little bit weird. Again, with my class that I taught, it was all about technology. We talked about these roads a lot. It was very difficult to actually push through multiple states, because each state had a right to do what they wanted with the thing. And some states did major upkeep on their roads, other states didn't. So once you got to a state, the road was just awful. Technically, that's not supposed to be how it is with the interstate, although sometimes it certainly feels. Well, if you're taking the back roads, if you're on the highways and you go between states, you feel it. There's a real good picture between North and South Carolina where it shows the highway, and it's just black top asphalt and then just immediate potholes. It's yep. I won't say which is which. There's the Claremont. Still has a little bit of a sail at the back for extra turning power along with the rudder. All right, technology. So the so-called multiplier effect, where you get an invention that is largely for a specific use, but then other inventors see it and say, hey, I can use it for this other thing. Um, and then it just expands, multiplies across multiple fields. So we start with Samuel Slater. Again, in my technology course, we really go into Samuel Slater. But long story short, he was born in England. He was an apprentice. Well, he was really a journeyman by the time before he left in a textile mill. He was meant to take it over, but he decided he could make more money if he immigrated to America and created a mill here. Because again, due to all the various laws that were put in place before independence, and then after independence, there were the various trade restrictions. We didn't really have a textile industry here, and that was where all the money was. But we also didn't have the technology, and that would take a while to figure out without anybody helping us. So Samuel Slater rolled on over here with the designs on how to build the machines for these mills. In his head, he didn't copy down the blueprints and smuggle them into the U.S. because the British Immigration Office were specifically looking for that, because they knew that there were people in the United States that would pay big money for that. So he was like, I'm going to go to America to be a farmer. And then he immediately went to Rhode Island and used his brain meats to rebuild one of these machines, along with the merchant Moses Brown. The machine that he copied was a design made by Richard Arkwright, which had been made 50 to 100 years before. So again, another major invention at this time that we should all be fairly familiar with, Eli Whitney with a cotton gin. Now, this is a specific breed of cotton that this was used on, the short staple cotton in the upstate, that was very easy to grow. It grew very quickly. It grew very easily, but the seed was very hard to get out of the actual cotton, so that slowed down production time. And Eli Whitney at the time was a traveling tutor, if I remember correctly, and was well out of money. So while he was traveling to his next job, he visited Catherine Greene, who was the widow of General Nathanael Greene from the Revolution, at Mulberry Plantation near Savannah. And I said the upstate, but Savannah is not the upstate. I thought it was the upstate. Whatever. And she's like, oh, well, you can hang out here a while since you're poor and desperate. You can just hang out here and be on your way when you're ready. And she told him about all the problems she was having with her plantation, and he's like, oh, well, I can probably fix this. So he just tinkered for a couple of days and made this cotton gin, which was really simple to make, and immediately applied for a patent. But since it was really easy to make, people just made their own and didn't pay any kind of patent fee like they should have. And he made basically no money off of it. Which, considering what it ended up resulting in, I don't feel too bad for him about it. But then there was the American system of manufacturing. Again, this is something that in my other book was 5 pages of stuff. Granted, that book was smaller than this one. So it was one of those little like reader books. But long story short, we were having issues with, I think it was specifically France. Like, it wasn't Britain, even though we're getting close to the War of 1812. Oh yes, June 1798, amid U.S. fears of war with France, the U.S. government granted an extraordinary contract to produce 4,000 rifles in 18 months. Okay, so the way rifles were made back then is they were made one at a time, by hand, individually. Which means, A, not only were they very slow to make, but if a piece on a rifle breaks, you throw the whole thing away. Because there's no like, oh, well, such and such broke, let's just take a piece off of another one, or let's just take a piece out of a box of spares and replace it. No, each piece is an individual, or I mean, each gun is an individual, and you can't just replace parts. That's how everything was made back then. So it was extremely slow, extremely expensive, and really inefficient. So the idea here was to use interchangeable, well, to use like machines, and not machines like we think of today, but like machining tools, you know, the big tables with the things that you clamp together, and then you run the grinder and it hopefully grinds it at the correct angles. To make these parts to make rifles with interchangeable bits for the U.S. government, which again wasn't an original idea because it was using plans by Henri Blanc, who was a French mechanic. Which is interesting because we thought we were going to go to war with France. We never did, but the idea was there. Oh, hey, this was another plan by Eli Whitney to make money. His first factory was in New Haven, Connecticut in 1809. So this idea of interchangeable parts, basically making it one part at a time and then being able to put it together and take it apart and swap parts out, spread all over American industry, guns, shoes, sewing machines, you know, whatever. Like, I'm just thinking about the many times my car has been giving me shit in the last year. My dad's like, oh, we'll just take this part out and pop another piece in, and, you know, we can buy a piece from the mechanic or AutoZone or whatever. Just pop it in there, and hopefully it'll be fine. It's like, all right, no, my car don't explode. You know, especially in advanced things like that where you don't even need to go to, say, Ford for, oh, don't be like this. Don't be like this. Not today. I'm not today. I should mention that the original idea of these interchangeable gun parts completely failed. Eli Whitney made no money. He didn't get the 4,000 rifles in 18 months. By January of 1801, he had produced only 500 rifles. Yeah, he didn't get it done. However, the idea caught on and spread all throughout the nation. So, good work, I guess. Dude died poor. I mean, he made more money off of this than he did off of the thing he's most well known for, but at least the cotton gin worked. But both things were like, hey, this is a good idea. Everyone else is using it now, and he's not seeing a penny. Anyway, here's some of the cotton machines, or I guess not cotton machines, the yarn spinning machines. This is a little bit later, though. We're going to talk about these horrible things up here in the ceiling. This is when they were run by steam engines, and they would just have like, I can only describe them as like crankshafts running in the ceiling. And because each machine wouldn't be powered by electricity, they'd be powered by actual kinetic energy of these big things spinning, because the steam engine will be like sitting outside running. And it would just spin these belts and run the machines. And look at how well protected the people are from the belts, which is to say not at all. So, you know, if you've ever opened the hood of your car while it's running and see that belt spinning and think, wow, this seems really not safe. Imagine that, but like way bigger and at head height. Also, children work here. Anyway, there's the miniature version of the cotton gin. And then the larger one they actually used. There it says the first cotton gin. I guess that's the first, like, practical size version. Which again, there's the people actually working on it, and then the assholes in the back with their fancy hats actually making money off of it. But I mean, it looks like the ones that are happy about it are the ones working on it, which to some extent I could see them being like, hey, this is way better than trying to pull it out with our hands, because that like left them with horrible I can't use brain, my words aren't working. Arthritis, like by the time they were 30, if they lived that long. So, you know, hey, let's run the cotton through this thing was certainly better for them than pulling it out by hand. But then once the plantation owners realized, oh, hey, this is faster, let's plant so much more cotton, the work certainly increased. These are the machines I'm talking about. Still very manual. Sometimes they'd be attached to a belt in the ceiling, which again, very safe, totally fine. Sometimes they were foot powered. The one on the right, they had like a pedal that you would just push and it would run a belt. But it would allow you to grind the piece as evenly as possible, rather than you working on a single piece like some kind of medieval blacksmith. So on to domestic production. So these inventions, the factories of Samuel Slater, the cotton gin, and also factories of Eli Whitney, they did gradually improve over time. You know, what Samuel Slater and Eli Whitney produced were not the last of what would be created. The book mentions the book calls it an evolutionary process, not a revolution of suddenly we have something completely new and everything's different. It's like, well, it's something that has existed before. Even the Erie Canal, which again we'll talk about probably next class. It's very early in the next chapter. And while it does change things dramatically, canals aren't new, like, at all. But if it's done in the right place at the right time. And the Erie Canal was still, like, a major undertaking. But, like, digging a ditch and making water go from one place to another, not that canals are that simple, but still, it wasn't a new idea. Francis Cabot Lowell, or just Francis Lowell, invented a power loom in 1811, so that the mills began producing more and more yarn. This is more of what we saw in the previous. These where the mills could actually, or where the machines could actually accept external power rather than be foot pedal powered. Otherwise, it would break them apart. Jethro wood, cast iron plow. Most plows were wood. They were just like a wedge of wood. However, with the growing cities, farmers needed to be able to produce more food. So basically what he did is he made a cast iron mold of the cutting edge of the plow and attached an iron like cover on the end of the plow. Eventually we'll have a steel plated plow, and that'll be where John Deere makes his money. So, due to the Embargo Act, with trade coming from France and Britain basically being gone, domestic manufacturing rapidly increased. So, since we weren't getting anything from France and Britain, we had to take care of things ourselves. So, we had factories like on the Pawtucket River, and just regular housewives increasing production, largely of cloth, which again, like I said prior to Slater, we weren't doing a lot of cloth production. That wasn't a thing we really had the technology for. Something that Britain jealously guarded. And also at this time, due in part to the commercial and economic system of the day, the idea of the companionate marriage, that's not one of my many typos, actually. That's the thing of the day. Husbands and wives working together in domestic enterprises. So again, not quite the old way of the husband does the thing and the wife stays home and cleans the house and takes care of the kids. It's, well, we're all kind of in this together, so we might as well do the work together. So again, if the husband's got a shoe shop, the wife would know how to run things as well, that sort of thing. And like with the farms, neighbors would share tools, skills, etc. With each other so that they could all prosper. And obviously in the South, especially along the southern frontier, it was typically slaves and sometimes hired servants that did most of the work because, America. So, a lot of these households were making their own things and trading locally. They were trading with their own neighbors, sometimes within the local community. They'd have their little, farmers market, whatever. However, the wealthier Americans were actually tapping into the market economy, which is something that we'll talk more about at the very least next semester, as the technology increases further. So as the market economy increases, families were sewing with thread that was spun by machines rather than thread they spun themselves. Um, they were working the fields with plows that were made with a cast iron, thanks to Jethro Wood's invention, rather than a wedge of wood that they had put together themselves. And a lot of them actually were eating food that wasn't even from the region that it had been grown in. They had come in via steamboat, and their diets were more varied, which I know at first it seems like, well, that's just a luxury, but that can often be really important for, their diets depending on where they live. So that's pretty good. So anyway, we have the Lowell Farms here. These machines being, again, run by these big belts up in the ceiling. The Lowell Farms specifically largely hired young women because they didn't have to pay them as much. And the bigger of these factories actually had dormitories on campus, so they didn't have to travel because, well, there wasn't a lot of commuting back then. You either lived within walking distance or you didn't work there. It wasn't like you sometimes see things today where it's like, oh, I'm going to go to work in my horse and buggy. Like, that wasn't really how things were done. You either walked to work or it was too far away. Here's this plow. Again, you didn't make the whole thing out of iron because that was really expensive. You would just coat the cutting edge in just like a little iron cap, which John Deere has the galaxy brain idea of, but what if steel though, and makes all of the money. I don't know. No, he didn't make a tractor. He made this, but steel. And people were like, oh, it's so amazing. All right. So, obviously, we got to talk about the everything else. And the everything else is slavery. So the technological change was largely felt in agriculture, and if it's largely felt in agriculture, it's going to be largely felt in the South, despite how anti-technology the South usually is. However, if someone says, hey, this can make it so you make a lot more money off of your farming, we're like, yeah, okay, we'll take a look at it. The cotton gin spread both cotton and slavery across the southern states and into the lower Mississippi Valley. I've actually got a map of that. It's apparently supposed to be an animated map of some sort, but whatever I grabbed was a still image, but you can tell what it's supposed to be. But again, it should be mentioned, this isn't a homogeneous sort of thing where everybody's growing cotton and nothing else. Louisiana, sugar, geez, that was loud. Sugar was still the most important crop, and in South Carolina, In South Carolina, we largely still grew rice because we have so much awful swampland. You don't really grow cotton in awful swampland. So, you had awful swampland things. Well, marshland, I guess, for rice, not swamp. Rice, indigo, for you, Nia. I guess probably still sugar a little bit, but that was more in the Caribbean and obviously Louisiana. Because Louisiana also had a lot of awful, marshy, swampy crap. They just have more gators than us. Not that we don't have gators. So, again, yes, I've got numbers up here. Obviously, I'm not going to be like, how many bales of cotton were sent off in such and such year, because that will be dumb and bad. But I just want to show you the ridiculous, explosive growth that happened here. So 1790, we had 3,000 bales of cotton, each weighing about 300 pounds apiece. So when I say a bale of cotton, I don't mean like the little 20-pound bales of like hay you see in a hay bale ride. I mean a 300-pound bale of cotton, like one of those big round fuckers you see sitting out in the field, but of cotton. So you have 3,000 bales being produced in 1790. By 1820, thanks to the cotton gin, it had increased to 330,000 bales. So it had gone up by over 100, not 100%, 100 times. Really, 110 times? And surprising no one, this increase in cotton productivity also paralleled a jump in slave population. Once again, 1790, the slave population was about 700,000, and by 1820, it was about 1.5 million. Now, this should also be mentioned that this happened as the international slave trade was ended, again, by Britain, not by the U.S. So slaves could no longer be brought in from outside the U.S. Because when I say international slave trade, I mean like shipping people across the Atlantic. So the southern slave owners had to increase the populations by natural means, which is to say the slaves had to live long enough to make babies. So in a way, things were somewhat better for them because they had to be allowed to live long enough to reproduce. And I guess technically to increase the population. So they couldn't just be like brought in, worked to death, and then bring more in, like it had been done in, say, Brazil and the Caribbean. So slave owners had to let them live longer and healthier lives. And in fact, one of the first things we talk about next semester, post Reconstruction, is the concept of what's it called? The convict lease system. Because, hoo boy, it's like slavery all over again. And the kind you don't have to worry about if they die or not. Now, of course, the slaves in all of this weren't just passive observers, especially once they were given slightly more leeway. They were establishing their own religious ceremonies. Do I have it written here? Yes. Southern slaves also established their own religious ceremonies, often held in the woods or swamps at night. African Americans were swept up as well in the religious revivals that burned across the southern frontier, beginning in the 1790s. Itinerant preachers or circuit riders held camp meetings that tapped to the deep emotional wells of spirituality. Baptist and Methodist clergy drew free and enslaved blacks as well as white frontier families to their gatherings, encouraged physical displays of spiritual rebirth. I don't know where that "and" came from in my brain. From trembling and quaking to calling out and dancing, offering release from the oppressive burdens of daily life for poor whites and blacks alike. So, evangelicals. Which gelled pretty well with the more dramatic of the, say, tribal traditions that they probably didn't have personally, because this is well after the slave trade was over. So maybe they knew from, say, stories of their ancestors. But I can see that tapping into old ideals. But here we have cotton production, cotton gin, 1790, and then just it explodes. And once again, cotton bales and production, along with slave population. In this map here, there's an interesting note to be made about this area here, this little curve in Alabama. I've seen 4 maps about that little curve in Alabama. The first one is from the, I think, Paleozoic era. It was where an ancient sea ended, so it was like a coastline. Because there was a big inland sea millions of years ago. So it created a very fertile land, very fertile region in the continent, which resulted in a really good place to grow cotton, which resulted in a heavy population of slaves. And the 4th map was due to all the slaves that were there. Once they were emancipated, that part of Africa is very heavily African American, and therefore that part of Alabama votes very heavily blue. Weird how that works. So it's weird you can go all the way back to like a prehistoric coastline changing how fertile the land is to like how people settled today. So let's just finish with the conclusion. We'll start chapter whatever next time, 9. Assuming I survived today. Technology, literary and artistic changes. Some took advantage of the opportunities of education, others went west. Some women had opportunity for access to education. Obviously, this expansion of cotton created a greater need for slave labor. And Native Americans dealt with all of this poorly, because of course they did, because they're constantly getting the short end of the stick. So yeah, we'll continue next time. Again, if you turn in your paper, if you don't mind grabbing it, that'd be great. If you emailed it to me, I don't have it printed out, but the grade's online. What's up?
I Snapchat, I didn't see mine up there.
Did you just recently send me yours?
I sent it last week.
Then I haven't gotten to it yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a rough weekend.
You emailed me back that you had to get in the paper.
Yes, I got it, but I hadn't looked at it yet.
Okay.
I think I might have just put it up. No, I haven't.
Okay.
I'll get to it. Yeah. Should be up here. Uh, do that you? I can't words. Um. You didn't have a works cited page. If you got an 85.
This?
Oh, let me see.
What if we emailed it to
If you emailed it to me, it should be on Blackboard.
you? I checked last night and I didn't.
What's your last name?
Voice.
Forrest.
Oh, I didn't get my test either.
Yeah, I didn't get yours.
I can print mine out.
Turner. Let me see. Yeah, I don't see your paper.
Would you like for me to print it out?
That will be fine.
I'll bring it to you.
Let me see. I think the issue, I can make that a 90. I think the issue was what was my issue here? That's a 90, don't worry about it.
Sounds good.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. Thank you.
What's up?
Oh, I didn't line my paper up like that. What I didn't line. Don't we have another paper coming up?
Yes. It's 31. It's due the 5th of December. It's the last day we'll be in here. And the default topic is anybody in the Revolution, which doesn't necessarily mean like a founding father. It can just be anybody. Because, we talked about all the various women in the Revolution. It can be any of the foreign people that came in. The women you can talk about. But you can also talk about like anything up to. Whoops. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I forgot I was still recording. I gotta head to class, so I will see y'all later on. Bye for now.